got activists in most of election here in the Highlands.
Just a administrative thing. I've sent you a submission. It hasn't appeared published yet. Unfortunately, the website you have, I couldn't make it read with that, so I sent it separately. And I had a note back from the Legal Aid Commission, which is going on. It sounds as though they might have received it by mistake. So I have told them, but if it hasn't appeared, if there's somebody in your administration I could discuss it with, and they can possibly find it, or I'll send them another copy. But it hasn't appeared, and I noticed there's some published ones from Jersey, but not that one. Okay. Do you want to ask us questions, or do you want...
Well, I rather guessed that you might have things you wanted to say to us or ask us.
Well, the big thing, I think, our grief is that you're not meeting the public. As we've written, quite a lot of us have written, as I understand it from other people, they've written saying the same thing. You're not going to learn much about Jersey dining at the Atlantic. The people aren't there. I mean, if you want to know what goes on, you're going to have to speak to the general public. I think that's one of the big feelings. And one of the ideas that you don't receive individual complaints, again, is a bit of a nonsense as far as the Channel Islands and I suspect the Isle of Man is concerned, because there's no organised protest movement going on here. There's no political parties. People are individuals, and you'll find that the Privy Council registers are stuffed over the centuries with individual petitions. You've got somehow rather to get down to listening to individual people.
We, as a committee in the United Kingdom, we don't deal with individual cases. That's not part of the role of the committee's job. See when the Ministry of Justice is doing its job properly. That's the role of the select committee system. And our own standing orders within the UK preclude us from being an investigatory body on individual cases.
I don't think the point is we want you to take up the cases, but we want you to be aware of individual cases and to know what's actually going on. And this is the only way.
Received evidence, written evidence, drawing attention to various matters of that kind.
Well, our concern is the issue of good government in the island, which is only one part of what you're looking at. But we certainly feel that the Ministry of Justice should pay more attention to what is happening here. There's 800 years of British history runs through these islands. We are British citizens. We have got British passports. We expect to have the same standards of government, good government, that apply in the United Kingdom, although say perhaps it isn't such good government, but whatever. We certainly feel that because this island, and it's referred to here, is the idea of capture of the islands by a small economic elite, and that's probably what has happened here. And we feel that democracy is suffering as a result, and there needs to be more intervention by the UK government to oversee and put right the things that aren't right in the islands.
What do you think the threshold for intervention on the grounds of good governance should be? In our previous report, we set out a threshold which involved questions as to whether there was the rule of law, whether there was a breakdown of law and order, whether there was endemic corruption as the sort of threshold that would have to be passed to justify UK government intervention. What do you think?
Well, can I just intervene there, because it relies...
And he did have the...
Well, I was thinking of 1781, 1769, when there was a very peaceful revolt that occurred in this island, which was a demonstration, and the men of Trinity actually invaded the royal court to put forward various demands about manipulation of the price of wheat, which affected how much they had to pay for the land. And the bailiff left the island and immediately called the British government over to a regiment of foot, saying there's a revolution going on and there's perversion and etc., etc. Sure enough, the regiment came over, and the colonel in charge realised that the protesters had right on their side, and he set about actually producing the first code of laws for the island of Jersey. So he took on board the fact that there was a need to redress grievances. Now that's a very high threshold where it takes something like that in order to intervene. And obviously we're a bit more civilised than that, and things have moved on from an 18th century constitution. And I think your threshold is far too high. I mean, I think there is a degree of policy scrutiny going on, but that's been criticised. And perhaps we can look at the SARC model, which is our hope, because there the British government intervened to, if you like, fight back the old feudal order and establish some kind of democratic government, and particularly the separation of powers. That's desperately needed in this island, and it's something that the local elites will not embrace. They will not do it. Positions of the bailiffs.
And I don't doubt in Sark that there were people who had protested, as I know they have, over many years, individually protested, and the UK government wouldn't take much notice of them. The same here, you see, individuals can't object to the local hierarchy. We can't object to it because it's not possible. It's not sufficiently impartial. It has to be outside intervention. This is exactly what's happened in Sark. It has to be. The Isle of Man, you've now got an Attorney General locked up. You've got a senior magistrate locked up in jail here. I don't know what's happened in the Isle of Man. But this sort of corruption, it cannot be challenged from within.
But the magistrate was in fact...
The magistrate here was locked up because he committed a fraud, but it wasn't an individual grievance. It was resolved because it was a commercial fraud. But if it was a case of injustice, somebody thought it was injustice, they could have gone on. It will never get addressed here because there are many calls, you'll have received them in your correspondence, of people complaining about injustice by the law officers, the senior officers, the most senior officers. And it cannot be adjusted, it cannot be dealt with from within. It has to have outside intervention. It's the only way it can be looked at impartially.
So should there be any limits on the UK government's range of intervention in the affairs of Jersey?
You could look at it, if you're looking at it benevolently, the UK is here to ensure good governance. I could give one example as that of gerrymandering. You know, if one of the Crown dependencies was undergoing some potentially far-reaching constitutional debate about where it's going in the future, and it was blatantly obvious that gerrymandering was going on to create a system which was actually unfair, even more unfair on people depending on where they lived. I'd expect the UK to be interested in that, and at some point to say, guys, you can't do that. If you're going to have a system, it should be at least compliant with good principles such as the Venice Commission, which are not even recognised over here. That's one area. We should look at, especially as a Justice Committee, you might want to consider how jurats are elected in Jersey, and is it right in the 21st century to have lay magistrates elected exclusively by politicians and by advocates? That seems like a close shot. Questions have been raised, but they don't get resolved internally. And the other one is...
When you say they don't get resolved internally, do you mean that no decision is reached? Or no decision is reached which...
The House Scrutiny Panel, for example, which is, I guess, the mirror of yours, albeit smaller, we recommended that changes were made, but they simply won't put through.
Sorry, which changes?
We talked about the jurat's role in a very limited sense to do with the Board of Visitors, the prison, which is exclusively magistrates. You have your independent monitoring boards in the UK. We researched this and said that actually it's not, it doesn't comply, it doesn't fit in with modern principles of divisions of power to have magistrates being the ones who inspect the prisons and look after prisoner welfare. And those things should be able to be resolved internally, and when basic principles like that and the separation of powers can't get resolved internally, then I would think that's where the conversations would need to happen.
How do you compare that with the situation in the UK, where similar arguments, and almost every argument put forward has a parallel in the UK? And we had very big internal arguments about the decision to reduce the size of the House of Commons by 100 members, and the decision as to how the boundaries be drawn. And so the same sorts of accusations were being thrown around at that stage.
But we
had to resolve that.
The discussion isn't so much controlled by a group over there as it is. It's controlled very much. The elitist group here does control the discussion. I mean, you've had two major reports. Well, I'm ineffective. Nobody takes any notice of me. We've had two major reports which have come out and said the bailiff should not be sitting in the States. Ignored so far. I mean, they were sat on by external chairs, brought in, and they're still ignored. You see that the people cannot overthrow this entrenched system.
What harm does the fact that the bailiff sits as Speaker without a vote, without a right to speak in the States?
Well, Monty will tell you he controls very much what goes on in the States. I mean, he may not appear to be to the public to be controlling, but he's very controlling.
I think you could argue that in fact the bailiff's very competent. It depends who you've got on the day. The point is, for those receiving justice in the Royal Court, that they're the ones to ask whether they feel that they're getting a fair hearing. And it's also about
that's departing from my question. My question was, I understand the division of powers,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
I fully understand that, and until 5 or 6 years ago, we had a Lord Chancellor who sat as Speaker in the House of Lords. What I'm asking you, simply, is what harm does the fact that that gentleman sits there as Speaker, albeit carrying no particular political label, not being able to speak or vote, what harm does it do?
Well, in practical terms, when he takes that knowledge, you're not supposed to sit in the legislature and take that knowledge into the court. Now, I've heard the court, the
Well,
judge sitting in the court.
excuse me, every debate in the House is out live on Radio Jersey. So if he were a judge who wasn't interested in sitting in, he could switch his radio on in the car.
He can do that, but when he gets to court, he should switch himself out of the court. He should not sit in the court.
On a very basic level, it doesn't make economic sense to have him there. That's a job that could be done by somebody who's on a states member's salary, paid at 40.
Somebody else has to be paid.
Rather than 300,000. That's one tangible. But there's also the perception of conflicts of interest.
Well, I can appreciate there's a perception, but what I'm asking you is
There is a real
something a bit more solid.
There is a real concentration of power in the hands of the bailiff, and has been historically. I mean, in the 18th century, the bailiff was dictator. That's been ameliorated, but still, the bailiff will decide what questions can be asked in the States. That's a very political
Should the
position.
United Kingdom government decide how Jersey evolves its constitution? Rather, constitutional changes have taken place in Jersey over the years, and no doubt there will be more in the future. Should that be decided by people of Jersey or by the people of the United Kingdom?
Well, historically, change has only come from the outside, and it's been with pressures from the outside. For example, the constitutional changes in 1948 were brought about, yes, by the returnees coming back from England having fought a war, wanting to build a new Jerusalem.
But they were Jersey people, weren't they?
Yes, and you've got the
Well, you had
Tudorini himself coming over to make sure that these reforms go through.
But let me ask you, look at it from the other end of the telescope. Change was imposed effectively from the UK. That's a democratic vacuum.
No, it's not.
Well, can I just finish the point? Because actually, if you impose change from outside without the endorsement of change coming from within, from people who vote for you in the Senate, surely the latter is better than the former.
You've got 60% voter abstention. That
We have a lot of that.
We have a lot of that.
Okay, but at the last referendum there was a 26% turnout, which shows that government lacks legitimacy. It's a small
Could I just
collusion
put it to
control.
you? Could I just put it to you, just as an alternative, not
Yeah.
necessarily my opinion, that people are quite content if they can't even come out and vote in a referendum. Maybe they're quite content.
That is one possible conclusion. But
Sorry to interject, guys. Can you just wrap up the next?
Can I just address the line? I mean, we completely understand, as a states member as well, I completely understand the position that you're in as a committee, and you've obviously got your terms of reference. But I guess the bottom line is that, to answer what you asked earlier, is that you don't have a backstop as the UK, apart from maybe you've got the European Union, which also does impose.
You have as well.
Yes, yeah, that's right. But in that sense, so we look to the UK, if you like, for some kind of hope, for those who are perhaps looking for some kind of hope. But I completely agree, you shouldn't necessarily be telling us what to do. I mean, you shouldn't be imposing law, but
The essential part is setting up the forum so that a proper, free and discussion can take place, which is set up on fair. The referendum here was an absolute total farce. This is the sort of thing that you set up from within. We want people to come in and set up the forum so the discussion can take place, so everybody can. Bear in mind also there's a very high immigrant population here who don't give a damn one way or the other, just trying to make a penny. They're not interested in politics. Bear that in mind, and they are manipulated by this system.
Well, thank you very much. We've asked you questions because we want to elucidate your views and where you come from, why you hold them so strongly. And we'll take them back with us along with all the other
I think
MPs.
our concern is that the elites here will not modernise. They will not democratise, and that is the role and function of the British government, is to make sure there is good government. That pressure has to be put on, and SARG is the model to show that reform can actually, and democratic systems can be put in place.
And there is a bit of a difference to 100,000 people in Jersey and 600 people in South.
yeah, so it's even more urgent in Jersey, we would argue.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.